The process server didn't look like a threat when he walked into the lobby of my architectural firm on a Tuesday morning. He looked bored. He held a thick manila envelope, asked the receptionist for Sloane Vance, and when I stepped out of the conference room, he handed it to me without breaking his stride. "You've been served," he said, and let the glass door swing shut behind him. I didn't drop my coffee. I didn't gasp. I just walked back to my desk, sat down, and broke the seal. Because when your parents have spent your entire adult life treating your independence like a personal insult, you learn to open envelopes carefully. The header on the first page was printed in bold, heavy ink, "Petition for appointment of emergency conservator." My stomach tightened, but my hands stayed perfectly still. I read the petitioner line. Arthur and Helen Vance, my parents. And beneath their names, the reason they were asking a judge to strip away my legal rights, my financial autonomy, and my ability to make my own decisions. Grounds for emergency appointment, severe psychological instability, and incapacity to manage personal and financial affairs. I blinked once, slow, staring at the word incapacity. I run a commercial design firm. I manage payroll for 12 people. I pay my taxes early. But the petition didn't care about my reality. It cared about a story. And attached to the back of the petition was the weapon they were using to tell it. Exhibit A, Comprehensive Psychiatric Evaluation. I flipped to it. It was 6 pages long, printed on official-looking letterhead from a place called the Oakwood Behavioral Clinic. It had my full name, my date of birth, my social security number, and it detailed a complete mental collapse. According to this document, I was suffering from aggressive paranoia, erratic financial behavior, and severe delusions. It claimed I was a danger to my own estate and completely unfit to hold assets. At the bottom of the last page was a signature in thick blue ink, followed by a medical license number and a stamp. Dr. Eris Thorne, Chief of Psychiatry. I stared at the signature, feeling the air in my office turn freezing cold. I had never stepped foot inside the Oakwood Behavioral Clinic. I had never met a Dr. Eris Thorne. But to a judge reading this on a Tuesday morning, I was already a ghost. I was a patient who needed a guardian. And I knew exactly why they needed me to be a patient this week. Because this Friday was my 35th birthday. When, according to my grandfather's trust, my 35th birthday was the exact day the generation-skipping trust he left me dropped its oversight restrictions and transferred fully into my name. 7 figures, liquid, mine. Unless, of course, a judge declared me legally incompetent before Friday. If that happened, the money wouldn't go to me. It would be routed directly to the accounts of my court-appointed conservators, Arthur and Helen Vance. Most people would have picked up the phone right then and screamed at their parents. They would have demanded answers. They would have cried. But crying is exactly what people who file fake psychiatric evaluations want you to do, because it makes you look like the diagnosis they just bought. So I didn't call them. When I picked up my desk phone and called the one person whose job was to protect the paper trail, my trust administrator at Sterling Fiduciary Services. "Sterling Fiduciary, this is Marcus," a calm voice answered. "Marcus, it's Sloane Vance," I said. My voice was completely flat. "I need you to place an emergency administrative hold on my trust account, right now." I heard the click of his keyboard. "Sloane, is everything okay?" "No," I replied. "My parents just filed an ex parte petition for conservatorship using a forged medical evaluation. They are going to try to intercept the transfer on Friday." Marcus stopped typing. In the financial world, the word forged is like a fire alarm. "Are you looking at the petition?" he asked, his tone dropping an octave. "I have it in my hands," I said. "Read me the case number and the court department," he said. I read them off the stamp in the top right corner. "Okay," Marcus said. "I am placing a hard freeze on the trust. No disbursements, no routing changes, and no third-party authorizations without a verified court order that clears our internal legal review." "Thank you," I said. "Sloane," he added, his voice tight. Ex parte means they are asking the judge for an emergency order without giving you a chance to respond. Check the hearing date on the summons. I flipped back to the first page. My pulse hit my throat. It's today, I said, at 2 o'clock. They had served me at 10 in the morning for a hearing at 2. They wanted me to panic, show up unrepresented, and look like a lunatic in front of a judge who was already holding a piece of paper that said I was crazy. You need to get down to the county courthouse, Marcus said, and you need proof that document is fake. I'm getting it, I said, and hung up. I didn't have time to hire a litigator. I had barely 3 hours. But my parents made one massive miscalculation when they decided to use a fake medical document to steal my life. They forgot that medical records leave digital footprints. I opened my laptop, typed the name Oakwood Behavioral Clinic into the search bar, and found their primary contact number. I didn't call the front desk. I navigated to their compliance and records department. A woman named Diane answered. Medical records. Hi, Diane, I said smoothly, matching her administrative tone. My name is Sloane Vance. I need to verify a document that was allegedly issued by your clinic. We can't release patient records without a signed HIPAA release, she said automatically. I'm not asking you to release anything, I replied. I'm looking at an evaluation that has my name on it, signed by a Dr. Eris Thorne. I need to know if this clinic uses electronic verification codes on its outgoing psychiatric reports. Diane paused. Yes, all our official reports have a barcode and a 12-digit verification ID printed at the bottom margin. It ties back to our internal portal. I looked at the 6-page document in my hand. I checked the bottom margin of page 1. Nothing. Page 2. Nothing. Page 6, right below the signature. Just blank white space. Diane, I said quietly, does doctor. Will Eris Thorne ever issue evaluations without that verification ID? There was a long silence on the line. Then Diane said something that made the trap my parents built suddenly look like a cage with their own names on it. Ma'am, she said, her voice dropping into total confusion. Dr. Eris Thorne hasn't issued an evaluation for anyone in 3 years. I stared at the thick blue signature on the page. Why? I asked. Because Dr. Thorne passed away in 2023, she said. My hands went completely cold, but my mind snapped into absolute focus. My parents hadn't just bought a fake evaluation. They had bought it from someone who didn't know the doctor they were impersonating was dead. I looked at the clock. It was noon. I had 2 hours to let my parents walk into a courtroom and present a dead man's signature to a judge. I didn't hang up the phone. I sat at my desk, listening to the faint hum of the clinic's hold music bleeding through the line, and I let the reality of Diane's words settle over me like a sheet of ice. My parents hadn't just paid someone to lie. They had paid someone who was sloppy. And in the legal system, sloppy is a gift. Diane, I said, my voice perfectly level, stripping away any trace of panic. I need you to do exactly what I'm about to ask because someone is using your clinic's letterhead and your deceased chief of psychiatry's name to commit fraud in a county court at 2 o'clock today. The line went dead quiet. When Diane spoke again, her administrative tone was completely gone, replaced by the sharp, self-preserving alertness of someone who suddenly realized they were standing near a legal fire. Oh, what do you need? She asked. I need an email, I said, from your official Oakwood behavioral domain. I need you to state that your clinic requires a 12-digit electronic verification ID on all official evaluations, and I need you to state the exact date of Dr. Eris Thorne's passing. Diane hesitated. I can't confirm patient status without... I'm not a patient, I interrupted, calm but immovable. And I'm not asking for medical records. I am asking you to verify your own corporate policy and the employment status of a doctor who has been dead for 3 years. If you don't send it, my next call is to the police to report identity theft using your clinic's credentials. That was the lever. Because institutions will always protect themselves first. "Give me your email address," she said quietly. 3 minutes later, my inbox chimed. The sender was d.miller@oakwoodbehavioral.com. The text was brief, factual, and devastating. It confirmed the 12-digit protocol. It confirmed Dr. Thorne's date of death as October 12th, 2023. I didn't smile. I just hit print. But one email wasn't enough to collapse a conservatorship hearing. Judges like layers of proof. So I opened a new tab and went to the State Medical Board's public registry. I typed in Eris Thorne. His license profile loaded. Status, inactive. Reason, deceased. I hit print again. The printer in the corner of my office hummed and spat out the 2 pieces of paper. They were thin, boring, and completely devoid of emotion. They were beautiful. I took the forged 6-page psychiatric evaluation, placed it in a manila folder, and slid my 2 printed pages right behind it. I didn't call a lawyer. When I didn't have the time to sit in an office and convince a stranger that I wasn't crazy. When a judge is holding a piece of paper that says you are severely delusional, hiring a lawyer at the last second just makes you look like a frantic patient resisting care. I didn't need a lawyer to argue my sanity. I just needed the record to prove the lie. At 1:15, I walked into the county courthouse. The building smelled like floor wax and old anxiety. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting pale shadows on the people lining up at the metal detectors. I put my bag on the belt. I kept my folder in my hand. When I stepped off the elevator onto the 3rd floor, I saw them immediately. My parents. They were sitting on a wooden bench outside Department 4. My mother, Helen, was wearing a conservative gray cardigan. When holding a tissue in her hand like a prop, she was waiting to deploy. My father, Arthur, sat next to her, checking his watch with the stiff, annoyed posture of a man who was irritated that stealing his daughter's trust fund was taking up his Tuesday afternoon. Standing in front of them was a man in a tailored navy suit, holding a thick leather binder. Their attorney. The moment my mother saw me walking down the hallway, her face contorted into a mask of deep, agonizing tragedy. She stood up, taking a tentative step forward. "Sloane," she whispered, her voice trembling loudly enough for the bailiff by the door to hear. "Oh, sweetheart, we're just trying to get you help." I didn't slow my pace. I didn't flinch. I stopped exactly 3 feet away from her and looked directly into her eyes. There were no tears, just a dry, desperate performance. "And don't touch me," I said, my voice quiet enough that only the 4 of us could hear it. My father stood up, his jaw tight. "You are sick, Sloane," he said, using his deep, authoritative voice, the one he always used when he wanted to shrink me down to size. "You're not thinking clearly. You're paranoid. This is for your own good before Friday." Before Friday. He couldn't even help himself. He had to mention the deadline. The attorney stepped between us, raising his hands in a practiced gesture of false peace. "Ms. Vance," he said smoothly, "I am Davis Gable. I represent your parents. This doesn't have to be contentious. If you consent to the emergency temporary order today, we can arrange for private care. We don't need to drag your condition through the public record." He looked at me with the soft, "and attached to your petition before you filed it." I looked at his leather binder, then back at his face. "Mr. Gable," I said calmly, "did you verify the exhibits attached to your petition before you filed them with the clerk this morning?" Gable's patronizing smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "The medical evaluation is comprehensive and signed by the chief of psychiatry," he said smoothly. "I suggest you let us help you." "That wasn't my question," I replied. Before Gable could answer, the heavy oak door to Department 4 opened and the bailiff stepped out. "Matter of the conservatorship of Sloane Vance," he called out. My mother dabbed her dry eyes with her tissue. My father adjusted his tie like he was walking into a board meeting. Gable gestured toward the door, confidently leading the way to his victory. I followed them inside, my hands down at my sides, my folder tucked under my arm, feeling my pulse steady into a cold, rhythmic beat, because they thought they were walking into a medical intervention. They didn't know they were walking into a fraud trap. The courtroom was empty, except for the court staff. Judge Caldwell sat at the bench. He was an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and a face that looked exhausted by family drama. He watched us take our seats, Gable and my parents at the petitioner's table, me alone at the respondent's table. Caldwell opened the file in front of him. He read in silence for a long moment, and when he finally looked up, his eyes landed on me. It was the worst look a judge can give you, pity. He had read the fake evaluation, and he believed it. "Miss Vance," Judge Caldwell said, his tone gentle, treating me like I was made of glass. "I see you are unrepresented today. This is an ex parte petition for an emergency conservatorship. Your parents are alleging that you are in an acute psychiatric crisis and are incapable of managing your financial affairs, specifically a significant trust distribution scheduled for this Friday." "I understand the nature of the petition, Your Honor," I said. Gable stood up immediately, projecting his voice to fill the room. "Your Honor, if I may," Gable said, "the situation is dire. We have attached Exhibit A, a comprehensive evaluation from the Oakwood Behavioral Clinic, signed by Dr. Eris Thorne. It details severe paranoia and erratic behavior. The respondent is a danger to her own estate. We are simply asking for temporary control to protect her assets from her own delusions." My mother let out a soft, rehearsed sob. Judge Caldwell nodded slowly, looking back at the petition. "The medical documentation is extensive, Ms. Vance," the judge said, holding up the forged 6-page report, "and the diagnosis is severe. Do you have any response to this evaluation before I rule on the temporary order?" I stood up. I didn't look at my parents. I didn't look at Gable. I looked straight at Judge Caldwell, and I picked up my thin manila folder. "I do have a response, Your Honor," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet room. "I respectfully request that the court deny the petition and refer the petitioners to the district attorney for filing fraudulent documents." Gable let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. "Your Honor—" Please," Gable interrupted. "This is exactly the paranoia detailed in the report. She believes everyone is conspiring against her." Judge Caldwell frowned, his patience thinning. "Ms. Vance, accusing your family of fraud without evidence is not going to help your case." "I am not making an accusation without evidence, Your Honor," I said, pulling the 2 pieces of paper from my folder. "I am making a factual statement about Exhibit A." I stepped out from behind the table and walked toward the clerk, handing over my documents. "Exhibit A is a forgery," I said, keeping my voice entirely flat. Gable sighed dramatically. "Your Honor—" "Mr. Gable, let her finish," the judge warned, though he still looked at me with tired skepticism. "The evaluation submitted by my parents claims I was examined by Dr. Eris Thorne, Chief of Psychiatry at Oakwood Behavioral," I said, watching the clerk hand my papers up to the bench. "That is correct," Gable said proudly. "The problem, Your Honor," I continued, "is that Dr. Eris Thorne did not write that report." I waited exactly 1 beat, letting the silence stretch just long enough to trap them. Because Dr. Eris Thorne died 3 years ago. The courtroom stayed so quiet I could hear the faint mechanical hum of the HVAC vent above my table. Judge Caldwell didn't gasp. Judges don't gasp. They freeze. He placed my 2 sheets of paper flat on his heavy wooden bench, right next to the 6-page forgery my parents had paid for. He looked at the state medical board printout. He read the status line silently. Deceased, October 12th, 2023. Then he looked at the email from Diane at Oakwood Behavioral. And when he finally looked up, the pity in his eyes was completely gone. It was replaced by the cold, heavy stare of a judge who had just realized his courtroom was being used to launder a felony. "Mr. Gable," Judge Caldwell said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. The attorney stepped forward, his practiced confidence instantly evaporating. "Your Honor? Did your office subpoena this medical evaluation directly from the clinic?" the judge asked. Gable's eyes darted to the papers on the bench, then to me, then back to the judge. He was a professional litigator. He knew a trap the second he saw the steel teeth. "No, Your Honor," Gable said smoothly, instantly building a massive, invisible wall between himself and his clients. "My office did not procure the document. The petitioners provided the evaluation to my office yesterday evening. They stated it was the result of a private emergency psychiatric consultation." My father's head snapped toward his own attorney. His jaw dropped a fraction of an inch. Because that's what happens when you buy loyalty. It expires the exact second the liability outweighs the retainer. Judge Caldwell slowly turned his gaze to my father. "Mr. Vance," he said, "your attorney just stated you provided this document to him. Is that correct?" My father stood up. He tried to use his boardroom voice, the deep, resonant tone that commanded respect from his subordinates and usually bullied my mother into silence. "Your Honor, there must be an administrative error at the clinic," my father said, adjusting his suit jacket like he could tailor his way out of perjury. "We hired a private crisis intervention firm to handle her intake. If there is an issue with the signature, it is on the consultant. But the substance of the report is entirely accurate. My daughter is a danger to herself." I didn't object. I didn't interrupt. I just watched him lie. Judge Caldwell tapped his pen on the email printout. "The substance of the report," the judge repeated. "Mr. Vance, this email from the clinic's records department states that all official evaluations require a 12-digit electronic verification, ID printed on the bottom margin." The judge held up Exhibit A. "This document does not have one. Do you know why?" My father opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "Because a dead man cannot log into a medical portal to generate a barcode," the judge said. My mother let out a sharp, genuine gasp, her hands flying to her mouth. Not a performative sob this time, real shock. When she looked at my father, her eyes wide with sudden terror. They hadn't verified the doctor. They had just paid the fee, taken the paperwork, and assumed their money made it bulletproof. "Your Honor," my father stammered, a dark red flush creeping up his neck. "We were defrauded by the consultant. We were desperate. We were only trying to protect her trust fund from being liquidated." He was pivoting. When the medical lie collapsed, he tried to use the financial lie. "She has been exhibiting erratic financial behavior for months," my father continued, his voice rising, trying desperately to regain control of the narrative. "She is draining accounts. She is transferring large sums of money blindly. We have proof." Gable looked at my father like he wanted to tackle him. "Arthur, stop talking," Gable hissed under his breath. But my father couldn't stop. Because men like my father cannot fathom losing in a room where they expected to be the smartest person. He reached into his tailored jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I have a ledger," my father said, holding it up like a shield. "A direct printout from her primary trust holding account, showing unauthorized chaotic wire transfers initiated just this week. She is bleeding the principal before it even vests on Friday." Judge Caldwell's eyes narrowed into slits. "You have a printout from her trust account?" "Yes," my father said, stepping proudly toward the clerk. Gable didn't move to help him. Gable took another step back. I stayed completely still, my hands resting lightly on the defense table, feeling my pulse steady into something resembling ice. My father handed the paper to the clerk, who passed it up to the bench. I knew exactly what that paper was. It was the reason I had called Marcus at Sterling Fiduciary Services an hour ago, because my parents hadn't just forged a medical record. They had spent the last 2 weeks trying to build a financial case against me, which meant they needed access to a bank account they had no legal right to view. The judge unfolded the paper. He looked at the letterhead. "This is an internal transaction history from Sterling Fiduciary Services," the judge said, his voice dropping another degree. "Exactly," my father said, his confidence returning. "It proves she is financially incompetent." The judge looked at me. "Ms. Vance, did you authorize your parents to access your trust records?" "No, Your Honor," I said simply. "I am the sole beneficiary, and until Friday, the trust is administered exclusively by a corporate fiduciary. My parents have no signatory authority, no legal oversight, and no right to access my transaction history." The judge looked back at my father. "Mr. Vance, how did you obtain an internal banking document?" My father stood taller, inflating his chest. "I am her father. I requested an emergency review copy from a contact at the firm to prove her instability to this court." He thought the word father gave him a free pass to bypass federal banking privacy laws. He thought the judge would care more about the alleged transfers than how the paper was acquired. But I wasn't relying on the judge's feelings. I was relying on procedure. "Your Honor," I said, stepping forward slightly, "then may I address the court regarding that specific financial document?" "You may," Judge Caldwell said, his tone no longer treating me like a fragile patient. "That document is not a record of my financial instability," I said clearly. "It is a record of a breach of fiduciary privacy, and the transfers my father is pointing to are not chaotic or unauthorized." My father scoffed loudly, waving a hand in the air. "She wired $50,000 to a shell company 2 days ago." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I did not wire $50,000 to a shell company," I said. I looked directly at my father, letting the coldness in my voice carry across the silent courtroom. "I wired $50,000 to a forensic accounting firm," I said. My father's face froze instantly. My mother dropped her hands into her lap, to her rigid posture crumbling. Because a forensic accounting firm isn't something you hire when you're delusional. It's something you hire when you are hunting. The courtroom didn't erupt. It suffocated. A forensic accounting firm isn't something you hire when you're delusional. It's something you hire when you are hunting. My father's hand, the one that had just confidently handed my private financial ledger to the clerk, slowly lowered to his side. Judge Caldwell looked at the ledger, then back at me. "A forensic accounting firm," the judge repeated. His tone wasn't skeptical anymore. It was clinical. "Yes, Your Honor," I said calmly. "The firm of Hayes and Croft. I retained them on the 12th of this month." Gable, the attorney who had spent the last hour treating me like a psychiatric patient, I suddenly looked like a man standing on the tracks listening to a train whistle. "Your Honor," Gable said, his voice completely stripped of its previous polish. My clients were unaware of the nature of the wire." "Your clients are unaware of a lot of things," Judge Caldwell said, not taking his eyes off my father. My mother leaned toward my father, her voice a frantic, breathy whisper. "Arthur, what did she find?" I didn't answer her. I answered the record. "My grandfather's trust vests completely this Friday," I said, addressing the bench. "For the last 6 months, my parents have repeatedly asked me to sign a voluntary power of attorney, claiming it would make the tax transition easier. I declined." The judge nodded once, tracking the timeline. 3 weeks ago," I continued, "I received an automated alert from my commercial design firm's operational account. Someone had attempted to initiate a hard credit pull using my Social Security number and my business tax ID." My father's jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped in his cheek. "I didn't scream at them," I said, keeping my posture entirely relaxed. "I hired Hayes and Croft to run a trace on the inquiry IP address and to audit any secondary access points attached to my name." Judge Caldwell leaned forward, resting his forearms on the heavy oak. "And what did the audit find, Ms. Vance?" I opened my manila folder and pulled out the third and final document I had brought with me. It wasn't a medical file. It wasn't a bank ledger. It was an engagement summary from my accountants, printed on crisp, watermarked paper. The audit found that the IP address used to run the unauthorized credit check belonged to a router registered to my father's home office, I said. And it found something else. I handed the summary to the clerk. It found that someone had been quietly attempting to change the mailing address on my Sterling Fiduciary Trust profile. My mother squeezed her eyes shut. My father took a half step toward the bench, his boardroom mask completely shattering into panic. "She's lying!" my father snapped, his voice loud and hollow. "That's a fabrication. We were just checking to make sure her accounts were secure. She's taking normal parental concern and twisting it because she's paranoid." He was drowning, and he was trying to use volume as a life raft. But judges don't care about volume, they care about paper. We're at the internal bank ledger from Sterling Fiduciary. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, his voice dropping into a register that made the bailiff by the door shift his weight. "You stated you obtained this ledger from a contact at the firm." "Yes," my father said quickly, eager to validate his own evidence. "An associate who knew I was trying to protect my daughter. He pulled it for me to show the court." "I see," the judge said. The judge picked up his pen and used the tip to point to the bottom right corner of the ledger. "Are you aware, Mr. Vance, that internal banking systems automatically generate a footer on printed transaction histories?" My father froze. "This footer," the judge read aloud, includes a timestamp, a terminal ID, and an employee login credential." Gable stepped completely away from the petitioner's table. He wasn't just building a wall now. He was leaving the building. "Your Honor," Gable said sharply, "I must formally state for the record that I have not reviewed that specific document, nor did I advise my client to procure it outside of the standard subpoena process." "Noted, counsel," the judge replied without looking at him. The judge turned his eyes back to my father. "Mr. Vance," Caldwell said smoothly, "the employee login printed on this ledger is J. Miller 42. Is that your contact?" My father didn't answer. He couldn't, because admitting the name meant admitting to inducing a bank employee to violate the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act. "Your Honor," I said, breaking the silence. "Before I drove to the courthouse today, I called my trust administrator at Sterling Fiduciary. His name is Marcus. I informed him of the ex parte petition." The judge looked at me, giving me the floor. "Marcus placed an emergency administrative hold on my entire portfolio," I said, "and I gave him this case number. He is currently running a compliance audit on terminal access for my profile." My mother's face went the color of ash. "So," I continued, my voice steady and cold, "if employee J. Miller 42 pulled a confidential trust ledger for a non-signatory third party, Sterling Fiduciary's legal department is already drafting his termination and likely preparing a report for federal regulators." My father looked like the air had been sucked out of his lungs. He had walked into Department 4 expecting a quiet, rubber-stamped emergency order based on a fake doctor's note. Instead, he had just handed a judge a forged medical evaluation, confessed to possessing illegally obtained financial records, and implicated a bank employee in a federal privacy violation. All on the public record. Gable didn't wait for my father to speak. The attorney grabbed his leather binder and snapped it shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Your Honor," Gable said, his voice entirely devoid of the patronizing warmth he had used in the hallway. "At this time, the petitioners respectfully request to withdraw the petition for emergency conservatorship." He was trying to pull the plug. He wanted to pack up the forged papers, walk out the heavy oak doors, and pretend this afternoon never happened. But you can't unring a bell in a courtroom, and especially when the bell is a felony. Judge Caldwell slowly took off his wire-rimmed glasses and placed them on the bench. "Counsel," the judge said, his words measured and heavy. "You cannot withdraw a petition after submitting a forged medical document as Exhibit A." Gable swallowed hard. "Your Honor, my clients—" "Your clients," the judge interrupted, his voice finally rising to fill the room, "attempted to use this court as a weapon to seize a multi-million-dollar trust fund by fabricating a psychiatric crisis. They presented the signature of a deceased physician. They submitted illegally obtained banking records, and they expected me to sign an order stripping a competent woman of her legal rights based on those lies." My mother started to cry. Real, ugly tears. "We didn't mean it like that," she sobbed, clutching her gray cardigan. "We just didn't want her to waste the money. We are her parents." "Ma'am," the judge said coldly, "being a parent does not grant you immunity from fraud." My father looked at the floor, his hands curled into tight, useless fists. The judge turned to the clerk. "Retain all exhibits submitted today. Stamp them into the permanent record." Then he looked at me. "Ms. Vance," Judge Caldwell said, "the petition for emergency conservatorship is denied with prejudice. They cannot refile." "Thank you, Your Honor," I said quietly. "But we are not finished," the judge added, picking up his pen. "Because a judge doesn't just block a fraudulent strike. A judge dismantles the people who threw it. And Judge Caldwell was already writing the order that would ensure my parents never touched a single piece of paper with my name on it ever again. Judge Caldwell didn't just deny the petition, he dismantled their future access to me. He looked at my parents, who were now sitting in terrified silence, and began issuing orders that would become permanent public record. I am referring Exhibit A, the fraudulent psychiatric evaluation, to the district attorney's office for investigation into forgery, perjury, and filing a false document in a legal proceeding," Caldwell said. My mother let out a strangled sob. "Furthermore," the judge continued, ignoring her, "I am issuing a permanent protective order. Arthur and Helen Vance, you are prohibited from contacting Sloane Vance, her employer, her banking institutions, or any medical professionals acting on her behalf." My father stared at the heavy wooden table. The boardroom executive was gone, and he was just a man who had gambled with his daughter's life and lost his own reputation in the process. Caldwell turned to the clerk. "Provide a certified copy of today's transcript and the submitted exhibits to the respondent immediately." Then he looked at Gable. "Counsel, I suggest you retain your own representation regarding your submission of these documents, regardless of who handed them to you." Gable nodded stiffly, his face pale. "Understood, Your Honor." The gavel hit the sound block. "Court is adjourned." I didn't wait for my parents to try and speak to me. I didn't need their apologies because I knew they weren't sorry for what they did. They were only sorry they got caught. I stood up, took my certified copies from the clerk, and walked out of the courtroom. The heavy oak doors closed behind me, sealing them inside with the mess they had made. By the time I reached my car, my phone was ringing. It was Marcus from Sterling Fiduciary. "Sloane," he said, his voice completely professional but carrying a sharp edge of internal corporate panic. "We completed the terminal audit." "And?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Employee J. Miller 42 accessed your account outside of standard workflow," Marcus confirmed. "He has been escorted from the building by security. Legal has frozen his credentials, and we are self-reporting the GLBA privacy violation to federal regulators. We are also preparing a formal cease and desist against your father." I started my engine. "Keep the administrative hold on my account until midnight on Thursday," I said. "Drop it the second my birthday begins." "Understood," Marcus replied. "Happy early birthday, Sloane." When Friday morning arrived, I didn't wake up to a surprise intervention. I didn't wake up in a clinic. I woke up in my own house, poured a cup of coffee, and opened my laptop. I logged into my Sterling Fiduciary portal. The dashboard loaded. The restrictions were gone. The oversight tags were removed. The trust had vested completely. It was 7 figures, liquid, and securely under my sole Social Security number, protected by dual-factor authentication that my parents could never bypass. They didn't call to wish me a happy birthday. They couldn't. The protective order made sure of that. Instead, they spent my 35th birthday sitting in a lawyer's office, a criminal defense lawyer this time, trying to figure out how to avoid indictment for the forged medical record and the illegal banking ledger. My father's contact at the bank was facing federal charges. The private crisis consultant they claimed to have hired evaporated into thin air the moment the DA started looking for invoices. They thought they could use a fake diagnosis to rewrite my reality, but they forgot that while stories can be manipulated, the record is absolute, and the record doesn't care who your parents are. A few weeks later, my forensic accountants completed their deep dive audit. They found 3 other minor attempts my father had made to reroute tax documents over the past year, all of which were added to the DA's growing file. My firm had its best quarter yet, and I transferred my entire portfolio to a new, highly secure private wealth management team that requires in-person biometric verification for any changes. My parents are currently awaiting arraignment, paying hourly fees to lawyers who don't care about their excuses. If your family tried to use a fake medical document to take control of your life, would you confront them privately, or would you let them walk straight into a courtroom trap like I did? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, drop a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.